Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
Good afternoon and welcome to our special broadcast on the occasion of Missouri Governor Mike Parson's first State of the State address. We'll be hearing from Governor Parson in a few minutes, and later on, the Democratic response from Senator Gina Walsh of St. Louis County, the Senate Minority Leader. We welcome our listeners to our public radio sister stations, KCUR in Kansas City, KBIA in Columbia, KRCU in Cape Girardeau, and KSMU in Springfield. I'm Don Marsh in St. Louis. Joining me in studio and briefly coming out of retirement to do so is our longtime political reporter, Joe Mannies. Jason Rosenbaum is in Jefferson City to cover the event. He is in the House chamber where the speech will be delivered. Jason, set the stage for us.
Right now, there are oodles of lawmakers milling about, talking about their day, awaiting for Governor Parson to enter the chamber to deliver his first State of the State speech since he became governor in June. It's a big moment for the relatively new governor because, like his predecessor, Governor Eric Greitens, he has the opportunity to substantially reshape state government. And Greitens obviously squandered that opportunity for a variety of reasons. And Parson is really going to flesh out his workforce development and infrastructure agenda momentarily.
Is he anywhere in sight? Are we close?
I think we're pretty close. I see the Sergeant of Arms milling close to the back of the chamber. There are these giant brown doors that are going to be open, and the governor is going to come through those doors with a delegation of Republican and Democratic lawmakers. It's a big celebratory affair. This is actually the first time in a very long time that the State of the State has happened in the afternoon as opposed to the evening. So maybe you'll have some lawmakers a little less tired this time.
I think many of us are grateful for that, Jason. Joe Mannies, what are you looking for in this address?
Well, a couple things. Governor Parson has been talking about workforce development for months, since shortly after he took office. So this State of the State address, which is coupled with the release of his proposed budget. So he's going back to the traditional thing where the governor also lays out this financial plan, which people are looking at while they're listening to him talk. So this is the first time that he's actually put money behind his words. So the fact that he's talking about $22 million towards a new scholarship program and various spending initiatives aimed at improving workforce development. So it's not just him calling for it, it's him saying, I want to commit this and this and this from this year's budget. But at the same time, he does face some budget constraints. The state's income for the current fiscal year has not hit the targets that they had hoped for so far. Now, they have a surplus from the previous year, so that's been covering the shortfall. But at some point, that's not always going to be the case. Plus, it makes it more difficult if you're proposing a new spending proposal. Either you're saying that you're expecting that income will begin increasing, or this is what you're going to cut to make that happen. And so people are going to be paying very closely to look in the details of what this is about.
Are we going to be hearing more numbers today or more policy?
Well, usually it's a mix. I mean, I was just like you, I was glancing through his text. A lot of it in the State of the State address is general policy, but as I said, it's traditional, and he's fitting in with tradition where he had the budget director give this very detailed summary to reporters a couple hours ago, which lays out the numbers, saying, here the governor's going to be proposing this is what he wants to spend for it. The governor is going to be proposing this is what he's going to spend for it. Because sometimes in the State of the State address, the governor doesn't always get into all those financial details. So people listening to the speech, especially reporters, will be looking at this financial sheet that they just got laid out to them by the state budget director.
Jason, workforce development, as you mentioned, is going to be key in this, apparently. That seems to be the watchword of today's politicians. I noticed that was a big theme for J.B. Pritzker in Illinois earlier this week.
Yeah, and it's not a particularly non-vague term. So I guess that's another way for me to say it's kind of a vague term. And what I'm expecting the governor to do is kind of flesh out what workforce development means. And a lot of that is steering the Department of Economic Development's focus away from, maybe not completely away from trying to land big ticket businesses, but to try to enhance opportunities for people in small towns and large towns throughout the state to be trained in specific technical jobs that are not being filled for various reasons. So it's also something that is not super controversial. I think that both Republicans and Democrats generally agree that developing workforce we're just hearing the gavel right now, so the lawmakers are getting into their seats, and it looks like the officials are going to be introduced momentarily.
Why don't you lead us into this, Jason? You can see what's happening. We can't, so just take us right to the speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will start the afternoon by voting to suspend.
So right now, House Majority Leader Rob Vescovo of Jefferson County is basically announcing people that are in the chamber. By custom, both the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House are on stage with Parson while he's making the speech. He obviously appointed Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, so those two are very close, and they will likely be working together on a whole host of different issues. And also Speaker of the House Elijah Haar also is kind of simpatico with a lot of the workforce development and transportation issues. So they'll be listening pretty carefully as the governor is making his speech. Right now, most of the House members are in their seats. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of senators may be walking down the center aisle of the Missouri House and sort of steered to their particular seats. This is one of the few opportunities in the Missouri General Assembly session when the Senate actually joins members of the House to listen to a particular speech. So there's more announcements going on right now. This is kind of, again, the lead up to the senators being seated. And after that, the governor will be led to the front of the chamber.
I have a question for Joe, Jason. Stay with us, and when you see the governor, let us know, and we'll switch right back to you. But, Joe,
Yes.
You've covered a lot of these things in the past years. How often does what is said in the State of the State address match what has actually happened at the end of the legislative term?
Well, it varies because the General Assembly now is going to get his proposal and the proposed budget, and depending on the relationships, they may tear it apart, or they may go through and say, yeah, we like this. Now, since we're talking about a state government that is dominated by Republicans right now, I would guess that they're really going to try to fulfill what the governor's requests are, if at all possible. Again, as I mentioned before, it's going to depend on the budget, because the budget forecast right now is not what they had hoped. So, and it means that they may have to cut things to give the governor what he wants in these other proposals. So that's the thing people are going to be watching over the next few months. And frankly, the Democrats are just going to have to be support players because they're in such small numbers, particularly in the House, where all of this stuff will begin in the House. The Senate becomes like the stopgap. I mean, if there's something that's totally unpopular, where the Democrats do what they can to try to stop it, but where the Republicans really also tend to make their mark, because Republican senators often disagree with the governor on stuff. So that's where you'll see some of the turmoil at the end.
He, however, does have a pretty good relation, not only of the same party with the majority, but he has a pretty good working relationship with these legislators.
No question, which puts him in stark contrast to where Governor Eric Greitens was. I mean, a year ago, Governor Greitens was giving his speech. He had a bunch of proposals. None of them came to pass. A lot of them had to do with child adoption, that sort of thing, foster care. I mean, nothing happened. I mean, in part because all this other controversy ensued, but also because he didn't have any people in either chamber who really cared about what he's proposing, because they didn't like him. With Parson, totally different thing. They're going to do everything they can to try to pass what he wants, because he's got very strong people skills. And Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe is former state senator, popular over there, so he's got his bases covered. I will be surprised if most of this does not end up definitely in his budget proposal, but doesn't end up on his desk by early May.
So it's a roadmap to a specific destination, but there may be a detour or two along the way.
Possibly. I mean, it got a little more rocky during Governor Jay Nixon's years because he was a Democrat and it was a Republican General Assembly. But yeah, I mean, but Nixon also, like Parson, laid out his goals, laid out his objectives, had specific numbers, had his budget chief lay out stuff. People may forget that Greitens' first speech, he didn't even have a budget laid out. He was just platitudes. It was just a week or two after he took office. So Parson's going back to the old playbook of laying things out so that the members of the General Assembly, reporters, and the public know exactly what he wants and what he wants to spend the money for and how much he wants.
Jason, are you getting any sense of relief among members of the legislature that they are dealing with Mike Parson this time and not Eric Greitens?
Oh, absolutely. Both parties are glad Greitens isn't there anymore. Right now, by the way, the Missouri State Highway Patrol is bringing out the Missouri flag and the American flag, and they're going to present them to basically present the colors, basically. But going back to your question, Don, there is no question that both parties are very glad that the Greitens administration is over.
Joe, what have we gone through in the last year, comparing what's everything today compared to what it was a year ago with Greitens and that started the whole thing?
Oh, yeah. And as I've mentioned a million times, who remembers any of it? Who remembers anything that Greitens ever proposed? Who remembers any of it because of the personal scandals that ensued and took over everything? But and even his entry, because I was in the chamber last year when he gave his State of the State address. The governor walks in from the back, as Jason mentioned. He'll come in with a lot of pomp and circumstance. He'll be shaking hands with people on both sides of the aisle. It'll be a lot of glad handing, everybody cheering. It was a little different. I mean, Greitens did some of that, but the atmosphere was very different than what we will be hearing in a few seconds, if not minutes.
Governor Parson is not afraid to be controversial either. Early on, I mean, he's taking on something with regard to Amendment 1 that the people spoke on that just a few months ago, and he's looking to maybe turn some of that around. Yeah,
I mean, I think he's sending a message to the General Assembly to try to do something, but frankly, they're probably going to have to put something on the ballot in order to stop it in 2020. I mean, they're going to talk about all this other stuff, but frankly, it's a constitutional amendment. It's much more difficult to deal with as opposed to a proposition, which Parson, as a member of the General Assembly, had managed to alter this had to do with the puppy mills a few years ago. He was one of the leaders in blocking some of the stuff the voters had just passed. This time, it's a little different situation. So he's having to press the General Assembly to do something, but they're still figuring out what they can do aside from putting stuff on the ballot in 2020.
And they're going to have to figure out.
Yeah, I think they're.
Here we go. Good.
No, the governor's not there yet. They're actually taking the role. What I was going to just chime in to say, Don, is that I think Governor Parson's influence on Amendment 1 has been somewhat overstated by people, not necessarily by the Associated Press report that emphasized that any change to the new state legislative redistricting would have to go to the ballot again, but by ordinary people who thought he could just wave a magic wand and get rid of it. But I think that the legislature and frankly members of both political parties don't like the new system for various reasons, and I think the only question is whether they will get a proposal in this year or next year on the ballot for 2020.
There aren't too many legislators who like to mess with the gerrymandering system as it exists.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be, Jason's right. There's some in both parties who don't like certain provisions of Amendment 1, also known as Clean Missouri. But this is what we've got because they didn't set up a really aggressive campaign against it, and they never came up with some sort of proposal beforehand to address at least some of these issues that were on the public's mind. It's just they feel the Amendment 1 went too far. But again, they're going to have a couple years to try to figure this out, and I expect there's going to be some jockeying on both sides. because, again, Democrats are sort of split on this. Republicans united against it, but they didn't do anything about it. They had some high-profile people on a counter committee, and it went nowhere.
Jason, would we anticipate some discussion from the governor today, perhaps on a couple of hot-button issues that many people are talking about, the opioid crisis, the potential for taxes on Internet sales, that sort of thing?
On opioids, for sure. As far as the tax on Internet sales, I actually don't think that that's going to be part of the speech. Now, the legislature may decide to do that with or without Greitens telling them to do that, because
that would be
of a
Parson.
Supreme Court decision that basically Parson, yeah. They may decide to do that. By the way, Don, I'm just giving you kind of a 1-minute warning. I'm looking through those brown doors, and I definitely see Governor Parson speaking with a couple of people right now, the statewide officers, 3 of which, again, Parson appointed, are being introduced right now. Most of them are Republicans, but one of them, Democrat Nicole Galloway, the state auditor, was recently sworn in this week. There's some speculation about whether she is going to run for governor in 2020. She told both Joe and I on Politically Speaking that she was interested in serving a 4-year term, but people changed their minds, and Democrats don't have a particularly robust bench to take on Parson. So the fact that they were able to maintain at least one statewide office was a big deal for the party. Even though Galloway in prior years, let's say 2000, probably would have won by a lot more, given how little money her Republican opponents spent. But that's kind of looking into the distant future right now, not necessarily the state of the state speech.
Oh, we should remind people that state auditors have a rich history of moving on.
Yes, and also another thing, Parson's been talking the last couple of days about promoting school choice, which is a word for, some see it as a word for vouchers or options to the public schools. It doesn't appear, I could be wrong, but it doesn't appear that he mentions that in the speech. But again, it's going to depend on whether or not his budget makes some proposals about exploratory programs or something along that lines. But that's something people should be paying attention to as well.
Education will no doubt be a portion of his speech today. That's something very important to him
but
and
it's
to
mainly,
the state.
Yeah, but he's mainly focusing on the workforce development angle as far as his education proposal.
Yeah. Jason, let's get it back to you. How close do you think we are now?
Well, I don't want to give any inaccurate predictions, but my assumption is that it's going to start momentarily. A lot of cabinet officials are now being introduced, and many of the cabinet members, by the way, were part of Greitens' administration. I believe that Parson has only replaced one of them, the Department of Safety Director. So, in essence, even though Parson is striking a different tone, he has basically Greitens' cabinet, which for a Republican administration, I just got to say this as an observation, is diverse when it comes to gender. I think there are a number, I don't know if it's a record number of women in the cabinet, but it has to be close, and also diverse racially. There's African Americans in the cabinet, Asian Americans in the cabinet, and that was one of the few things that members of both parties agreed that Greitens got right.
Yeah.
I don't think there was much more beyond that.
I was going to say that the cabinet wasn't the problem during the Greitens administration.
No. Now, one of the things is the governor is proposing to cut state government a little bit by over 400 positions. It's unclear if those are already vacant and then it's just a paper thing. So that's something that I'm sure he'll offer some more detail, if not in a speech, soon afterwards.
In very general terms, what kind of financial shape is the state in?
Well, it depends how you look at it. As I mentioned before, the income so far this year has been less than what they had planned. But because they got sort of a windfall at the end of the last fiscal year, the fiscal year, ends June 30th, the new one begins July 1st. So because they had a lot of money come in last spring that they didn't need, they basically, in effect, rolled that over. So that's covering the shortfall right now. So, and in effect, Dan Hogg, who is the budget director, has told me several times that they could have a substantial deficit on paper and still be okay because they have all that money, several $100 million to cover it. But again, that's not going to go on forever. So when they're drawing up the budget for the next fiscal year, they're going to be keeping this into account, and they're going to be watching closely to see what happens between now and May when the budget has to be presented to the governor, whether or not it
Don,
means...
I just want to interrupt right now. Don and Joe, I apologize for interrupting, but Governor Mike Parson is now entering the chamber of the Missouri House. He is surrounded by a bipartisan group of senators and state representatives. As Joe kind of alluded to earlier, this is the opportunity for the governor to shake a lot of hands of the people that he's going to want to pass his agenda. And as I kind of alluded to before, unlike Greitens, who made some very controversial things, hallmarks of his agenda, namely curbs to labor unions, I think you're going to hear Parson really stick to broad issues that I think both parties agree with, and especially Republicans want to pursue. And I don't envision this is going to be an overtly red meat partisan speech. And there may be some of that sprinkled in there, but this is going to be heavy on policy because since Governor Parson has really no aspirations to do anything except potentially run for one more full term as governor, it gives him some latitude to take some risks and to propose some policy proposals that maybe somebody who is looking to the future wouldn't do. Right now, by the way, Governor Parson, as I predicted, is shaking a lot of hands of members of the Missouri House. Lots of hands are being shaken by Governor Mike Parson. Almost too many hands. No, I'm kidding. Like there's no such thing as too much handshaking. But you know, that right now he's approaching the dais kind of slowly because, as I said before, he's shaking a lot of hands, and he should begin his speech in the next minute or two.
Jason, this is your audition for doing play-by-play. Do you realize that?
Well, you know, not to brag too much, but I was either a finalist or an award winner for the Missouri Broadcast Association sports category. So I feel like I've already trained for this moment, Don.
And it shows. You're doing a fine job. Now let's get this guy up to the lectern and get this speech going.
He is ascending the lectern as we speak, and once I see him in view, I will stop talking and let the state of Missouri hear from Governor Mike Parson for his first State of the State speech. He is climbing up the stairs now, Don. This is Governor Mike Parson, his first State of the State speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to present to you your governor, Governor Mike Parson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Kehoe. Thank you, Speaker Haar, President Pro Tem Schatz, judges of the Missouri Supreme Court, distinguished state officials, members of the 100th General Assembly, and my fellow Missourians. I am honored and proud to stand before you this afternoon as the 57th governor of the state of Missouri. And one of the highest honors I have as governor is to introduce the First Lady of the state of Missouri, Teresa Parson. I am so proud of her and the grace she brings to her position as First Lady. And I look forward to the days when we have more time to spend with each other and our family and our grandchildren. But until that time, our dedication will be to the people of the state of Missouri. Months ago, I came into office amid rare and unique circumstances. Yet the focus from day one of my administration was putting the people of Missouri first, where they belong, ahead of partisan differences or personal gain. We traveled to every corner of this great state. We listened, we heard, and we learned. I stand before you today to share a vision that will chart Missouri's future into the next decade. Missouri is dear to my heart, and by working together, we can protect and build a Missouri that is successful for the next generations. The more we listened, the more it became clear that the people of Missouri are ready for bold solutions. Even when times are good, Missourians still face many issues and have a frustration with government that often works to protect the status quo and is unwilling to make bold steps. However, to move Missouri forward, we must take bold steps and tackle big issues. I will commit to you that bold ideas and tough challenges will not be something we shy away from. But my administration is willing to work with this legislature in a disciplined and focused way. And together, we can achieve big results and lay a solid foundation for our state's future. And it's time we have an honest conversation about the challenges we face and the solutions we need. The honest truth is that we have not been as efficient as we can be. We don't promote our state, our resources, and our people as best we should. And we have not prepared our state well enough for the future. And every Missourian deserves better. Make no mistake about it. We have before us one of the greatest opportunities by working together to improve Missouri and to be the best in the United States of America. The longer we delay and avoid tough decisions, the bigger our problems become. Many of us are willing to admit this, and I hope you can agree, that we cannot afford to delay action any longer. I'm asking for your help to move Missouri forward and deliver results, because after all, we are the Show Me State. What this means in practical terms is that we have to be honest about our priorities and united in our focus. As elected officials, we are good at declaring priorities. While some of our priorities may not be the same, when we try to make everything a priority, the fact is, nothing is truly a priority. So let me be crystal clear. Cultivating and training our workforce for high-demand jobs and investing in critical infrastructure are the priorities we must address this session. As I have traveled the state, I know these are issues important to every single one of your districts. Whether Republican or Democrat, rural or urban, we have good reason to work together to achieve real results for all Missourians. By addressing these issues now, we will make major investments for the next generations of the state of Missouri. There, of course, will be other issues that are important, like passing tax credit reform, working to make government more efficient and more accountable, protecting freedoms and promoting a culture of life, and passing regulatory and venue reform, all of which must be done. But our focus for the state of Missouri to strive both now and into the future are on two key priorities: workforce development and infrastructure. Let me tell you a story about a young man with us today. Troy is an 8th grader from Eldon who has experienced some hardships in his life. Troy's struggles are not unlike many families across Missouri. Quaker Windows is a Missouri-based company that has developed a partnership with Eldon schools to ensure students like Troy have a mentor all through high school, and to make sure that he not only receives a quality education and training, but he is also taught valuable life skills, like the importance of showing up on time and having a strong work ethic. Quaker Windows and Eldon schools have a community partnership. This example should be a model for how we approach new efforts to train the next generation of workers. Please welcome Troy, who is with us here today. We must consider making necessary changes to our education programs and update the training pipelines to ensure economic growth in Missouri. Our true dedication should not be build and create wealth, should be to build and create wealth, not redistribute it. For example, Missouri's high school graduation rate is higher than most states. This is something we should all be proud of. However, we fall behind other states when we look at post-secondary education. We are well into the 21st century, and yes, extra levels of education are needed to meet the demands of our workforce. And these jobs are going to provide higher wages, which will benefit Missouri families. This is why my budget calls for a total investment of nearly $75 million into bold and innovative workforce development programs. Consider those programs that build off the many projects we already have placed, like NGA West, Boeing's TX, Nucor Steel, and many others. When combined with our current economic development tools, all can be tremendously successful. In today's world, a higher level of education should not simply mean getting college degrees. This is why I'm advocating that we provide $22 million to fund a program known as Fast Track. Fast Track will allow Missourians to receive advanced training in high-demand areas, largely taught at our community colleges, technical schools, and colleges and universities. This will open the doors for Missourians to have opportunities to earn more money for their hard work. Fast Track will benefit tens of thousands of Missouri from every corner of this state. But to have a laser-like focus, we can't stop there. We must also start integrating employer and industry-led input into the needs and demands of the workforce, like increasing industry-recognized credentials as part of our high school curriculum. To further workforce development, this focus must also extend into the economic development tools we use as well. As a result, we're going to consolidate, repurpose, and add flexibility to a series of incentives we currently offer into a more streamlined program called Missouri One Start. That is why I'm adding $10 million to the Missouri One Start program to help place a greater emphasis on building out the workforce needs and for the job creation projects, so companies who use them are forced to plant deeper roots here in Missouri and become longer and more substantial partners. Also, we will be providing $16 million for Missouri Excels, a program for Missouri's higher education institutions to develop and expand employer-driven education training programs and initiatives to increase career readiness. Finally, when looking ahead, we know that we are up against the clock, competing with every other state across the country. But Missouri will be ready with the right tools in the toolbox. We'll be ready to ensure our state will move forward in workforce development and all Missourians will prosper. Not only is workforce development going to be a priority, but to ensure future success, we also need to take a serious look at long-term investments in Missouri's infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, we can no longer just think about bricks and mortar, roads and bridges, but also the location in which people look to invest capital and to operate the economy of the future. One of those areas in Missouri is high-speed broadband access. We currently have about 10 school districts and many rural communities that lack access to high-speed broadband, and that is unacceptable. Most recently, thanks to the President and our federal delegation, Missouri secured $255 million for the expansion of broadband to connect our state. With this exciting opportunity, it is also important we at the state provide funding to cover the gaps in delivering broadband. That is why my budget calls for an additional $5 million in broadband funding to close the gap that exists in federal funds and truly give the highest impact for all Missourians. Another area of focus is to put a greater emphasis on our Missouri ports. Located in the heart of the country, we are at the center of major opportunities, especially with the expansion of the Panama Canal. Missouri's agriculture and manufacturing industries have no better route to global expansion than delivering our high-quality products to the world through our waterways. In addition to our rivers, Missouri is one of the largest highway systems in the country. And since we sit at the nexus of the East and the West, this system receives a great deal of strain. Nonetheless, we maintain this system with one of the lowest levels of funding in the country. Over the years, we have seen proposals go before the voters and fail. But this cannot and does not mean we are expected to do nothing. This is why I'm asking you to consider an infrastructure plan. While funded through our budget savings, it will give us the ability to begin immediate work on nearly 250 bridges across the state of Missouri, all in need of critical repair or replacement. By doing so, we will be freeing up nearly $350 million in state and federal resources, allowing us to accelerate MoDOT's current list of state infrastructure projects. Also, we will be adding a $50 million cost-sharing program to assist our cities and counties to help address the most serious infrastructure needs in our local areas. In fact, this raises the challenge for each of us to find even more creative ways to locate savings to make more substantial investments in our infrastructure without a tax increase to the people of Missouri. These priorities did not come without some tough decisions. But as I said to you before, if we are to deliver on meaningful priorities to the people of Missouri, tough decisions must be made. As many of you know, the Department of Corrections is faced with many challenges, and we will not shy away from these challenges. As a former sheriff and law enforcement officer for over 22 years, I understand firsthand the importance of reentry programs and alternative sentencing. We need to be more efficient in these programs so we truly offer a second chance. And as governor, I am not interested in building more prisons. In fact, we've identified a plan to consolidate the operations at Crossroads and Western Missouri facilities in Cameron, Missouri. This decision is largely driven by our dedication to find efficiencies wherever we can in state government. And this can be done while ensuring safety, improving security, and delivering a much-needed pay raise, all being done with no layoffs. Not only are we making tough decisions with the Department of Corrections, but our budget recommends another major change to reorganize and streamline the efforts of the Department of Economic Development and Higher Education, a plan which will make our government more efficient. We have to start focusing more on the importance of outcomes in state government and less on arguing over the inputs. While this restructuring is important for the people of Missouri, I also want to be very clear that the problem is not our state workforce. To the contrary, I have found overwhelmingly that we have a remarkable and dedicated state workforce. But we, as elected leaders, must do a better job clearly identifying expectations and priorities, communicating and managing responsibilities, and providing better training to promote our success. Many of us in this chamber have programs in state government we think are important to our people. But as time goes by, governors change and legislators return home. And these programs grow with little oversight or accountability. The result is an expanding bureaucracy which becomes less efficient for the people of Missouri. Under my administration, we are going to fundamentally restructure state government, demand greater efficiency and accountability, and improve our customer service to all Missourians. I will admit this is going to take some time, but we are not going to put it off any longer, and it will start today. Just like families across Missouri, having a responsible budget is important and a way of life. For the first time in more than a decade, the governor's budget does not plan to spend every tax dollar. We have a business-smart budget that saves nearly $120 million to ensure we are prepared for any unexpected expenses. Our budget also proposes a reduction of nearly 430 government positions, all while maintaining our conservative approach to managing and streamlining government services. In fact, our administration recently completed the state's largest deregulation effort, eliminating nearly 1 of every 5 state regulations. And each of these initiatives I have laid out would not be possible without the drive, the commitment, and dedication of the Cabinet. Because we will not be able to achieve the type of common sense conservative reforms and restructuring Missouri needs without the remarkable talent and leadership in this administration. Please join me in recognizing the entire Cabinet seated in the upper gallery. There is another group of individuals here that's not in the script as it's written today, but it's a group that has never probably been recognized by a governor before at the State of the State address. But under the circumstances, when I come to the governor's office, I could have never accomplished what we've accomplished in 7 months without the people that work at the governor's office. Would you please welcome my staff and my administration there today? It is important to understand that being a good leader is not about being the best, but rather about your ability to make those around you better. Every day, my staff and cabinet are committed and focused to making all of us better, pushing one another to make Missouri a better place. Just weeks after I took office, quick decisions had to be made on over 100 legislative items, and the $28 billion state budget had to be approved. By working together, we were able to save millions of taxpayer dollars and implement the largest tax cut in Missouri's history. After taking office this summer, Missouri faced some tough and difficult times. We experienced one of the worst droughts Missouri had witnessed for many years. I called the administration together and we reviewed our options. To no surprise, we learned that the typical state government response was a series of requests to the federal government for assistance. We believe that was simply unacceptable for the farmers and families of Missouri. Instead of pushing paper, it was time for us to do more. Through the teamwork between the Departments of Natural Resource, Agriculture, and Conservation, we put Missouri state government to work for its people and delivered meaningful relief by working together. Again, several weeks later, we experienced tough times. When 17 individuals tragically lost their lives in the Branson incident, it was through the efforts of both state and local officials, including nearly every state department, that Missouri was able to quickly respond, recover, and offer immediate assistance to those in dire need. We had tough times when we lost 3 local law enforcement officers, and 6 others were shot in the line of duty. Thankfully, by God's grace, 3 members of the Kansas City Police Department are with us this afternoon after being shot in the line of duty. Would you please welcome these officers, Matt Williams, Brent Cartwright, and Michael Delaney. As a former sheriff, I understand what it's like to lose an officer in the line of duty. And we owe all these brave men and women a debt of gratitude for their dedication to public safety. It's only a matter of time before we again face tough situations. But by faith and working together, we can and we will move Missouri forward. I was proud that we were able to come together during a special session to finish your legislative priorities and pass meaningful reform to our drug courts and create opportunities for STEM education in our high school. These are the successes I am confident we will be able to expect this legislative session, because I am also willing to acknowledge no one person or party has a monopoly on good ideas. But the best ideas are those that will serve the people of Missouri. A key part of our efforts to improve Missouri's workforce and infrastructure is improving our citizens' health and health care by developing better access to providers and hospitals. Almost 40% of Missourians live in rural areas, and we are committed to making sure they too have access to both preventive and emergency care. In addition, we will be providing a substantial increase to help those facing the challenges of mental health, expand telemedicine technology, fight the opioid crisis, and better serve those in need. I'd also like to introduce another very special guest here this afternoon, my great niece, Zoe. Zoe, who is one of thousands living with the challenges of autism. The First Lady and I are deeply committed to doing all that we can to learn more about, to promote awareness, and to advance autism research. That is why we are advocating for $1 million to ensure families and parents have access to resources and are equipped to deal with the challenges that come with caring for a loved one with autism. Please welcome my great niece, Zoe, and her family to the chamber. And while my focus this legislative session will be on workforce development and infrastructure, we have already started intense planning for next session because we must also curb Medicaid cost, which accounts for over $10 billion of the state budget. And that is the reason why I hired Director Todd Richardson to lead this charge. Safeguarding the integrity of the Missouri Medicaid program is vital to the state of Missouri. Nearly 1/3 of Missouri's entire budget is devoted to the Medicaid program. It must be run with the highest level of integrity to ensure every tax dollar is accounted for. When I began this afternoon, I said it was time to have an honest conversation. A big part of that conversation had to revolve around all of us recognizing we can do better. And as your governor, I am committed to trying to get better every day myself. I'm willing to make the tough decisions that will put our state in a better position. And if we truly care about the next generation, I am absolutely confident that by focusing on the major issues of workforce development and infrastructure together, we will have a successful legislative session because these are the issues that will benefit all Missourians. In closing, I will leave you with a story about a young student that lives by these 10 two-letter words. If it is to be, it is up to me. If it is to be, it is up to me. These words have stayed with me after hearing this inspirational story. This young man had reached rock bottom and considered ending his life, but chose to overcome his obstacles and instead succeed in life. When asked what motivated him, he mentioned those 10 two-letter words. If it is to be, it is up to me. Even as someone with my share of gray hair, I have to say that is wise advice. If the American dream is to live on, I challenge all of us to remember those 10 two-letter words with one change. If it is to be, it is up to us. If it is to be, it is up to us. It is an honor and privilege to be the 57th governor of the state of Missouri. God bless you, God bless the great state of Missouri, and God bless the United States of America.
Governor Mike Parson has just concluded his first State of the State address. We continue our special coverage. Missouri Democratic legislator had prepared a response to the governor before his address. It was delivered by the Senate Minority Leader, who introduced herself.
Hello, I'm State Senator Gina Walsh. I want to thank the governor for sharing his priorities and goals with the legislature as we work together to pass a balanced budget and make our state a more fair and equitable place for all. About a year ago, things were a lot different around here. We had a different governor leading the state, one who chose to put personal ambition and partisan politics before all else. Now, with a new governor, it is our hope that those old problems are behind us. But simply being better than Eric Greitens is too low a bar to set for any of our leaders, too low for the kind of change we need. Missouri deserves better. After all, being done with a bad politician isn't enough if his bad policies remain. Policies that deny too many Missourians basic health care. Policies that attack working families and undermine their constitutional right to organize. And policies that turn our tax code upside down so that the middle class gets squeezed while special interests laugh all the way to the bank. I call on my colleagues in both chambers to abandon these terrible policies and listen to the people. Because the people have spoken. They went to the ballot box and defeated so-called right to work. They passed comprehensive ethics reform to root out corruption and stop gerrymandering. They passed a slow and reasonable increase to the minimum wage to lift up the working poor and grow our economy. And they passed medical cannabis to provide options for those struggling with disease and injury. These issues are settled, and any attempt to weaken or repeal the will of the voters must not pass. Instead, I urge my colleagues to return the Senate's attention to shared priorities, like fully funding the school foundation formula, increasing school transportation dollars, strengthening our workforce through higher education and job training, and making sure our mental health safety net is there for anyone in crisis. There are many months of hard work ahead of us, but I know we are up to the challenge. Because it is an honor to serve in the Missouri State Senate, an honor shared by 34 unique individuals sent to the Capitol by the people of our state. People are counting on us now to do the right thing, move our state forward, and get to work. Thanks again for this opportunity to speak with you today, and God bless.
That was the Democratic response to Governor Mike Parson's State of the State address, his first, which was delivered just prior to that. We continue our special coverage, and I'm in studio in St. Louis with Joe Mannies. I'm Don Marsh. Joe, you listened to the speech. Was there anything you heard you didn't expect?
No. As you mentioned earlier, he focused mainly on infrastructure, which he's trying to rebound from the loss of the highway tax proposal and trying to do more for workforce development. One of the interesting things I found is that near the end of the speech, he does talk about Medicaid. He had put former House Speaker Todd Richardson in charge of trying to reduce the state's Medicaid costs. When he talks about the $10 billion in the state budget, though, more than 2/3 of that comes from the federal government. So anytime the state makes any cuts in Medicaid, and we're already at the bottom of eligibility, that does mean we get fewer federal dollars. At the same time, he does talk about the fact that almost 40% of Missourians live in rural areas. They have been hit hard by the cuts in rural hospitals, many of which have closed. Most of those rural hospitals relied on Medicaid, and because many of the rural clients were poor and relied on Medicaid insurance coverage. So while he touches on this, he's not proposing any way to fix it. And of course, he's not proposing any sort of expansion. I mean, this is not, if that's going to be done in Missouri, it's probably going to be done the way it is in some other states where they did initiative petitions.
And of course, rural Missouri showed itself during the last election, did it not? And it cost Senator Claire McCaskill her job.
Yes, although while health care was a big issue, this part of it was not. It was mainly the whole pre-existing condition argument, and so it was a whole different focus during the campaign. But I think the voters, while they did pass many progressive issues, there wasn't anything having to do with health care. So it's going to be interesting to see if something does come up so that there will be something on the ballot in the next couple of years. I don't know.
Yeah, and infrastructure clearly played a big role in what he had to say today. We'll also have to wait and watch what happens there if the money is forthcoming to be able to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. Joe Mannies, thank you so much for being with us. That concludes our special broadcast of Missouri Governor Mike Parson's State of the State address and the Democratic response from Senator Gina Walsh. That concludes our coverage. My thanks to colleagues Joe Mannies and Jason Rosenbaum for being with us. I'm Don Marsh at St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.